4, 3, 2. Wait a minute. What?
Hello and welcome to Motivation Mondays with Monica Marie Jones. I am your host, author, entrepreneur, and motivator, Monica Marie Jones, and I am here live today with a very exciting interview for you with Senator Bert Johnson. He is not only a senator, but he is also an advocate for education reform, for regional mass transit, and for economic development. And as you know, every guest that I have on my show inspires me or motivates me in some way so that I know that they will do the same for you. Now, Mr. Bert Johnson, Mr. Senator Bert Johnson, his reputation preceded him in that several of my close friends and colleagues had some very nice things to say about him before I even met him, such as he's not your typical politician. He really cares about the people, if I can say that, or he's a really good guy. So when I met him, I learned those things as well, and I found that not only was he very brilliant and focused, but also very down to earth and truly for the people. So, Senator Johnson, every time I have a show, I have my guests do their 30-second elevator pitch for the audience because for my listeners, it is a business tip that you should know how to present who you are and what you do in a way that captivates people, draws them in, leaves them wanting more, and does not bore them to imminent death. So can you tell our listeners your 30-second elevator pitch?
Well, I'm a Detroit baby by trade, and if you live in the city of Detroit, then you are practicing living in the city of Detroit. And I've loved Detroit for as long as I could ever remember. I sort of found this thing. This thing kind of at one point found me, and it wasn't in my plans to ever become a politician, a senator, a state rep, or to do anything in the political field other than vote and just participate in the process. But as luck would have it, and maybe some call it fate, maybe it's even God's hand, seeing to it that I do some of what he needs me to do while I'm here. I've been able to really fashion up for myself a pretty good career in politics and public service and to take care of people. Sometimes people at the bottom, but oftentimes people who look just like us. And I've mixed that with a healthy dose of working for all people across all color spectrums. So it's been very, very interesting. There's a lot more to come. I just won a second term, and we got a lot of work to do. So I'm excited to be here, and Happy New Year.
All right. Thank you, and Happy New Year to you, too. And, your 30-second elevator pitch was a perfect setup for where I want to go with this interview. Now, before we dive into your story and your journey, I want to do a quick activity with you that I saw on the movie Best Man Holiday. It was the scene where the guys were kind of hanging out in the man cave, and they all shared 3 words that represent who they are and what they believe in. So, for example, the main character said that his was God, family, football,
Right.
in that order. So if you had to pick 3 words that represent you, what you stand for, that really speak to who Senator Bert Johnson is, what would those 3 words be and why?
Probably in this order, it would be God, family, humanity. And most notably because I've been a person that over the course of my 41 years has always been looking for a very close and personal relationship with God. I found it, thank God, and it has been something that has really taken care of me, especially in my adult years. Family, because that's all you get. If you're fortunate down here while you're on earth, I think you get a few friends, but family is forever, and you don't necessarily have a say into whose family you're born. But from the perspective of my family, I got a good squad, and we are happy people. We have a lot of fun together, and I wouldn't trade my family for anything, and I would do for them first before I would do for myself. Humanity, probably because I think there's an element of charity that needs to coincide with how we exist here and what it is that we do. And for me, being humanitarian is something hopefully that I will be known for when my days here are done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with the human race, and there's a lot of work that can be done when we get our cooperative act together. We just came off Kwanzaa, and there are a number of principles that I aspire to while I'm here. Humanity is right up there with the best of them. So for me, it's God, family, humanity.
Now, speaking of the human race and getting our act together, the first topic I want to discuss is the whole Black Lives Matter movement and everything we've been seeing happen, sadly, around the nation, particularly with young Black men and Black men in general. And we know that, there's protests. We know that there have been people who have been, activists around it, but what are some other things we can do to activate change besides just protesting or marching? What do you think really needs to happen, being a Black man yourself and the father of 2 sons?
Right.
What are some things we need to do to make change?
It's a great question because I think it really does revolve around how well we deal with ourselves and in our community first. And so how we spend money, what our consumer habits are, how we deal with each other, how Black men treat Black women. I can remember one of the things that was most notable for me when I was studying Malcolm X was listening to him say to other races who wanted to be a part of what it was that he was going to move to do post his Mecca trip, was that whites and other races could help, but Blacks had to get their family together first. And so, long before I'm ever going to point the finger at what anybody else is doing, and there are many instances and examples across the world where we can show injustice from one race to another, and that's not new in our history. But I think if we're really going to be successful as African Americans, as Africans in America, we're going to have to really take some concerted steps forward about how we conduct ourselves one with another. So much so that we become an example for what we want people to do to and for and by us. And then I think we have to examine our relationship with consumer and commercial America, the finances, and how every other race has been able to ingratiate themselves to the American economy and the government, and what we get back when you act financially, and how that then demonstrates or forces others to deal with you.
Now that's a perfect segue to one of the other questions I had for you. I asked some of our listeners, if you had any question for the senator, what would it be? And that question was around economic development.
Right.
And what I found was that, after getting all this education and degrees and things of that nature, I was virtually financially illiterate.
Right.
And so what can we do to help everyone else wake up like I did when it comes to financial literacy, financial freedom, particularly in our community?
It's one of the things that I talk about most with education reform. I don't think you can be a whole individual in the United States of America, which, by the way, is a company that operates financially, and you have to have your financial house in order to really deal with her. If, in fact, you're not in a stable relationship with money. And what does that mean? That means as early as you learn to ride a bike, as early as you learn to do certain things, chores around the house, and how to help your parents, you ought to be taught how to have a real good and solid and respectful relationship with money. When you go in certain outlets, you go in stores that perhaps the Arab Americans or the Asian Americans put together for themselves, small businesses that support their families, by the way, you're going to see young people at the register. You're going to see young people learning the customer service side of dealing back and forth. And in our community, since we don't necessarily run any of the small businesses, we're not in a prime position to really put that in front of our kids. For me, it means that we've got to examine the way in which we're getting along in America. And we have to ask are we being served? If you're simply a consumer, do you get anything back when you simply give your dollar away to get a good that usually has no tangible value on the other side of you are taking it in? It doesn't work for you down the road as an asset. So when it comes to education, I'm saying that culturally, African Americans in this country have to adopt for themselves. No one's going to do it for us. No one's going to push it into a curriculum. No one's going to offer it as an elective.
Right.
We've got to proactively prescribe for ourselves how in our education system we're going to teach our young people how to interact with money. And that is not simply a tool to take out and spend to get snacks and certain wares and certain gym shoes and stand in line for that kind of stuff. But that as early as you can possibly get your hand on something, you got to invest it.
Yes.
And you've got to invest it in a way that gives you something, and it's got to be on the other side. So it's got to be residual. So it's got to be 5-10 years down the road. If you're 15 and you've saved $5,000, there's a way for us to show you how you can take that $5,000 and turn it into your whole retirement by the time you're 40. But that's an investment strategy. That's not getting money right now, instant gratification, and it's serving yourself long term. And that's what others are really doing, and that's the way that they've been able to get along in this country. For us, we've got to take a deep dive on that.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've learned. It's like no matter how much education I got, no matter what schools I went to, that was not something that was intentionally taught. Right. And if it wasn't taught in the home or in other adults that were around me as a young person, then it just didn't happen.
Right.
And so that's when the tipping point happened for me when I said, I was 32 at the time, and I'm like, I make good money, but I have absolutely nothing to show for it. No assets. You mentioned assets. I had nothing saved. I didn't own anything. So I just picked up every book that I possibly could and learned in that way. So it sounds like now my next step is to not only embrace and practice what I've learned, but also find some young people to pass that on to.
Nobody's ever really told us that you should pay yourself first. That you should take a piece of your money and you should reserve it, put it away, and that's for you. And that's for your labor. So there are a lot of little things that we can do. I can recall going into college myself. We're first, second generation college educated people now in the African American community. But what that also means is that folks have found a way to make that a financial boon for themselves as well. When I first got to college, I remember somebody shoved a piece of paper in front of me and said, listen, I'll give you this credit card. And it's got a $600 limit. And you don't have to have the money up front if you use this thing. And I was not responsible enough to care for that card. And I think my $600 limit got settled for about $950.
I was in the same boat. And not only that, they're like, and you get this free t-shirt and this free frisbee. I'm like, what? I get free stuff? I never thought about the bigger picture.
It was magic.
Right.
But nobody taught me to be concerned about my financial wherewithal. Nobody sat me down about credit reports. Nobody sat me down about open lines of credit that serve me, the better lines of credit to have. Nobody taught me that you need to necessarily own property, that is the oldest wealth mechanism known to man in the world. Nobody ever really gave that to us. And when you're in the city of Detroit on purpose, trying to make it, day in, day out, that's an education in and of itself. And so you can't just survive without the financial side. I mean, culturally, every other community has it. It's time for us to have it too.
Yes. Now, speaking of community, one of the purposes of me having people like you on my show is to show the positive side of the community, the people that are making a change, are making a difference. So in essence, using media for the powers of good and not evil in a positive light.
Let me say congratulations to you on the launching of your podcast.
Thank
I've been watching with some bated breath, and I know there are lots of people out there who are really going to be enriched by it. This is a big, big thing you're doing. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. And media can be so powerful, and that's why it's so important for me to shine the light on what is happening positively in our community. Now, with that, I found that media often uses their powers for evil. And not only are our African American men being literally killed, but their character is also being murdered by the media. Now, recently, you were a target of a sensationalized story, which those of us like myself and many of your other constituents know how much you do for the community. So I want to give you an opportunity to use this as a platform to share whatever you want to share in response to that, or not, but just to know that we support you and we want to shine the light on the positive and not try to use media, to attack the character of those who are actually making a difference.
I appreciate that. I've gone back and forth about, and for those who don't know, there was a story on one of our major networks here that talked about it. I think the elbow of the story was that I didn't pay some young folks who had been in my employ for my campaign this summer. And so without even dealing with that, because everybody who really knows me knows nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, I invest so much in young people. It's just what I think you have to do. I think you got to reach back as soon as you can to help somebody who's younger than you come along and get instruction on what to do as soon as you know how to do that. So, but without really getting into that, because certainly I don't want to besmirch the character of young people. But young people are oftentimes corrupted by the adults that are around them, and they are led to think certain things. I can recall the first time I walked into UAD High as a ninth grader. I did not know that one of my best friends was white. I just didn't. And I was 13, and I was a bright kid, and I come from a good family, tough neighborhood. But Kent Dade was my guy. And I can recall when we got in the lunchroom, the whites on one side, the blacks on another, we kind of went our separate ways. And because nobody was in that lunchroom as a chaperone, as a lunchtime prefect, to say, hey, that's not the way we do things. As a matter of fact, you all should stay together. The fact that you two want to sit together, you have this conundrum that is presented to you, you should do away with that. Well, young people are guided by the adults around them, right, wrong, or indifferent. And oftentimes alongside the media, which is always waiting to besmirch the character. I don't think just blacks, but women and other people of color and people who are impoverished and they want to highlight illiteracy and mental illness. And they certainly want to talk about people who are in the criminal justice system. But long before that ever happens, there is this disdain that our media outlets have for our community. Right? They look down on cities like Detroit and Philadelphia and Chicago and what's happening in these communities. It again, I think, in my estimation, boils down to us deciding when have we had enough. There used to be a time when I was coming up where if somebody messed with somebody who was really, really important or close to you, they were in for it. Didn't mean you had to rub them out physically, but they might have got told off. They might have saw their business dry up. They might have been forced out the neighborhood. Could have been a number of measures that were going to take place. Today, I don't necessarily know if that's the same, if we live in the same community. And what I am saying is whether it's me today or you tomorrow, we got to look after each other.
Yes.
Because at the end of it all, I think we're all we have. The same as you have this media opportunity here, the same as you have your podcast, I can't say congratulations to you and then not tune in tomorrow. I have to be a supporter, financial and otherwise, because we have to establish a wraparound effect for what takes care of us in this community. Because at the end of the day, I think, just like what happened in that lunchroom, if the chips are down, we're all going to go to our respective sides.
Yes.
I still think I'm an African-American male that's going to see the beauty in my people. And so, without really getting into that story, I'm just saying that for me, the result is that we got to do a little bit more to combat it. There's a great movie out about Martin Luther King's life and that kind of thing. It's time we internalize that stuff for the new fight that's facing us today.
Yes. And thank you so much for taking the time to address that here.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Now, speaking of that situation, I know that you've overcome some different challenges and obstacles. Whereas if others were in the same types of situations, they may not believe or feel that it would be possible for them to become a successful senator. Right. It's very important for me to let people know that they are not alone, to be transparent about our challenges and how we have overcome them, because you never know who needs to be inspired.
That's right.
So I want you to think about a challenge that you've been through in your life, that you have overcome, and what you've learned from it.
Well, one of the more significant of my challenges, self-inflicted, I might add, is when I was 19 and I think in my third year at UD Mercy with a 3.875 grade point average, was doing very, very well. I decided that it would be a good idea for me to join a couple other young individuals who went to school, were making pretty decent grades, and we committed an armed robbery. And we committed a breaking and entering. And the story, I can tell you, gets dumber and dumber every time I try to tell it to people. But I've used it as a teaching tool for young people. And I can't tell you the number of people across the community that it has provided some sort of kinship with. I mean, because there's a growing number of people in our community who have had a contact with the law and have to wear that contact moving forward. For me personally, I never adopted and I did 15 months in prison, and I think 18 months on a tether, and then another 36 months on parole. So I had my fill of the system. And I was always told you do 2 days inside of a prison, the day you go in and the day you come out. And that was enough for me. And I can tell you I wasn't going back. It wasn't for me. And I realized very quickly that my upbringing, that the things that I've been taught and shown, that they weren't supposed to culminate with my imprisonment. It just wasn't supposed to happen. But then again, I was obviously silly enough and a follower and not a leader enough where I was exactly where I belonged. And so that was the first sort of revelation. Not to really psych myself out about, well, I don't belong here. I'm not like them. I went to great schools. I mean, me and that guy have so much that we don't have in common. But I had to examine and ask myself, well, Bert, I mean, you're here with him. And how did you get here? Because nobody made you do what you did. And so the first thing was accountability. And the second thing was really understanding or beginning to understand as I came into manhood, who are you? And what are you purposed for? You have this daughter when you come home. You still have school to complete. And now you got to figure out how to get along in this society. And what does it mean to be a productive member of society? Can you garner for yourself an employment situation or a professional situation so you can pay some taxes and buy a house and buy groceries and all that stuff? But I learned a lot about myself. And I learned even more about the community that was expecting some good things from me. I wouldn't trade it for anything of value, financial or otherwise, but it was a good teaching tool for me coming into manhood. It was 22 years ago, but it seems like yesterday. And so I've used it to train young people and to talk to my own children to make sure that they understand the pitfalls that belie us. One bad act, one bad judgment call can really put you in one of the worst positions of your life. And in a lot of instances, some kids end up dead. And so I'm thankful that never happened to me. but that even more so, I had a community that was ready to embrace me and give me my second chance.
Yes, and I want to thank you for sharing that, because I know there may be one young man listening today who thinks that because of a choice or a mistake,
Yeah.
or if there's a felony on his record, that it's just over.
Right.
His future is just bleak. But I think
it's
in
not.
sharing your story,
It's
it really gives people hope. So I really appreciate you for
It's
that.
attitudes. It's attitudes. It's approach. It's how you allow people to see you. There's nothing wrong with having braids in your hair, but I got to tell you, if you're going to have braids in your hair as a grown man in America, you better have a significant purpose for those braids. I mean, you better be able to teach on every braid on your hair, on your head.
Yes.
If you are going to want to try to get along in mainstream America, at some point you're going to have to put on a shirt that buttons down. And it can't be one of these great big white T-shirts that people sell on the corner stores, in the corner store. So it's got to be, it's got to be deliberate how you have people to see you, and in your verbiage. I was always told that when you speak on the phone, people should not be able to tell whether you're black. You should be able to speak with the King's English. When you write on a piece of paper, you should write with the King's English, and folks should understand I'm talking to an educated person, not a black man, not a white man. I'm talking to a person who's educated and is intellectually sound. So it really is attitude. I've never been denied a job for having committed a crime when I was 19. But a lot of it is attitude.
Yes.
Because I approached it in a way that most folks are shocked when they say, well, wait a minute, you did time? Yeah, I did. I did. And I'm not the only one. So it just means that you can make a mistake, but you got to get back up, and you got to keep moving, and you've got to determine something useful for yourself and be purposeful about it.
Yes, so I hope everyone is taking notes. I hope you have a notebook, a journal, or something. And if not, we're going to take a quick break so you can do just that. You're listening to Motivation Mondays with Monica Marie Jones, featuring Senator Bert Johnson on UrbanNationRadio.com.